Ladies and gentlemen, this RedGamer.com video, we have a couple of pieces of news from two games developers. We'll start with the smaller one first, because it's a very small little tidbit. Santa Monica Studios have confirmed that the PlayStation 4 will be seeing Flower running at 1080p at 60 frames per second, which is great news considering it's a launch title. Meanwhile, and this is the big part of the news, there's also been an interview with a developer responsible for Transistor. Now, Transistor, as I'm sure you're probably aware, is one of the bigger indie launch titles on the PlayStation 4 and is being developed by Supergiant Games, who are responsible for the pretty big hit actually called Bastion. So, Greg Kasavin, I'm hoping I pronounced that right, that is Greg and then Kasavin, have been conducting an interview, and he said that Transistor is making a console debut on the PlayStation 4 and will be available on the PC on the same day, so the game is not exclusive to any platform. Part of our decision to work with Sony and come to the PS4 first comes from how open and understanding Sony has been around the needs of a small team. They played the game at PAX East, where we showed it for the first time and really liked what they saw of it, so we began talking after the show. They put a lot of faith in smaller teams like ours, as evidenced by the prominent placement we got at their E3 lineup. We're self-funding and self-publishing Transistor, so our relationship to Sony is similar to, say, our relationship to Valve with Steam. We are working on a game coming to their platform. So, they were also asked about what your thoughts compared to the PlayStation 4 indie policy compared to the Xbox One, and will they be seeing Xbox One with a Transistor on the platform at any time in the future? And Greg said, we're only working with Sony at this point, so you know our thoughts and our stance towards smaller developers. I'm happy to see Microsoft also making a push to make it easier for independent developers to self-publish on their next platform. As a game's a player, I'm looking forward to both systems. With Transistor, all our focus is on the PS4 and PC launch and making the best game possible. Beyond that, we have no plans and we'll have to see things pan out. I'm pretty sure most of you will be aware, but because it's been pretty much covered to death in the media, but obviously Microsoft were heavily criticized early on at the Xbox One's announcement, and even late Xbox 360, or even mid to late Xbox 360, with their policy regarding indies. They needed to seek a publisher first, which obviously upset a lot of indie developers, since, well, if they could get the funding already via either Kickstarter or, fund it themselves, because they've got, they all are talented and they all know, they've got programmers and artists and they're all willing to work for free, or maybe, they've got a loan or whatever it is to self-publish the title. They don't want to then go through a third party. So obviously that was a massive blow against Xbox, but of course they are trying to remedy this quite substantially. However, as you've just heard, for some indie developers it's a bit late. They already started to sow the seeds with Sony, so now they have to push the title out, because obviously it's a bit late for very small teams to start working on a third platform, especially if they're working on the PC first, which is actually what Sony did. They started to approach a lot of PC devs when they saw the indie titles, and they said, hey guys, do you want to work on our platform? It's really like a PC. And the developers said, well, I guess we could take a look, and then Sony really supported them, and that's kind of how they won their hand in marriage, I suppose you could say. Anyway, then they were asked about what the differences are going to be between the PlayStation 4 and the PC version of the game. Greg replied that it's too early to say what differences between the PS4 and PC versions of the game. They were starting to work to ensure the game feels homegrown on both platforms, as that's been our stance towards multi-platform development all along. We want each versions of our games to feel like it's the best version. On the PlayStation 4, we're still exploring what we could do with the system's proprietary features to see what makes sense there. We've done at least one thing with the PS4 controller that we're excited about, though we're not going to give a shoehorn functionality onto it that doesn't need to be there. We've been thinking about controls from day one on this project and spent a bunch of time while prototyping on both gamepad-centric and PC-centric inputs, as well as making sure the game feels great on both platforms. So obviously all they're referring to there is just simple optimization for the platforms and their specific architectures. I don't particularly think this game is going to be that challenging for the PS4 or any PC to run. I mean, it's not an ugly looking game whatsoever, but at the same time, it's not like it's going to be, Battlefield 4 or, the next Call of Duty or something like that. It's certainly not going to be Killzone, for example. It's not something that's going to massively push the GPU or CPU. This is evidenced by the obligatory 8 gigabytes of RAM question, which obviously, I don't really agree with the developer because they asked, furthermore, unlike the PC, every PS4 comes packed with 8 gigabytes of GDDR5, which is beyond normal PC standards. How are you guys using extra memory? I don't really agree with that because obviously the PC layout, I mean, most PCs now come with 8 gigs of RAM. In fact, a lot of gaming PCs are starting to come with 16 gigs of RAM, and that's not including graphics card memory, but whatever. We can't always agree with questions, I suppose, but nevertheless, Greg responded, Transistor has a lot more animation and visual effects than our first game, so it's somewhat more memory intensive. We barely got Bastion running smoothly on the Xbox 360 at 720p, so that means that having a much bigger memory budget this time means that our artists don't need to make so many shortcuts creating the characters and creatures in this game. While memory constraints can lead to some creative solutions, we're nevertheless excited having more breathing room on the memory front now. Just in case you're wondering about shortcuts, this is like lower resolution textures on certain enemies, lack of animation, tons of level of details, various other bits and pieces that you could do to basically limit the memory budget. Now, as he said, it can breed some creativity, and oftentimes when programs are challenged, it's when they actually learn, or developers are challenged, it's when they actually learn the most, and their growth and learning period go up the most. It's like if you keep doing the same tasks with no difficulty whatsoever, you don't really learn anything, you're not really improving. On the other hand, if you're striving to try and make something fit, because obviously the PS3 and Xbox 360 had very limited RAM, well, you start learning quite a bit. On the other hand, sometimes it's just a lot nicer just to have all the memory in the world you need and not really need to worry about constraining your creative vision. So some people, and this is what the interviewer asked, some people believe that the PS4, when compared to a high-end PC, will become obsolete within a few years. So what's your perspective as a developer? Greg responded, I'm a long-time game player who's always enjoyed both console and PC games, so I put no stock whatsoever in PC versus console debates because I know from experience that both have their advantages. There are some fantastic games hitting the current gen of consoles, stuff like The Last of Us, so I don't think the rapid obsolescence of consoles versus PC has ever been a significant issue in the past. From the developer perspective, our stance is very simple. We want to be a bunch of vibrant, successful gaming platforms. The competition between platforms results in better games and better value for games players. This question, of course, stems from the fact that the PS4 is already being outdated with PC technology. For example, AMD are releasing a 5 T-flop 5 T-flop GPU. That's known as the R9 290X, by the way. And there are already several GPUs available for the PC which have 2.5 to 4 T-flops of computing power. You've the GTX 600 range, like 670, 680, or the AMD 7950, for example, or the AMD 7970, all had significantly more resources available, and that's why obviously the PC can run at higher resolutions. However, obviously with a fixed platform such as the PlayStation 4, developers can learn to get much more out of the system. Finally, they were asked if Transistor is going to be running at 1080p at 60 frames per second, and Greg responded, we're still early in PS4 development, though getting the game running at 1080p at a consistently smooth 60 frames per second is our target. Obviously, speaking that 1080p requires a hell of a lot more graphics processing than, well, let's say 900p even, or even 720p. I mean, as I've said, and regular viewers know this already, all you have to do to see the number of pixels that the graphics card has to process is literally type in like 1280 by 720 into a calculator, and you could do like 1600 by 900, and then you can do something like, oh, I don't know, 1920 by 1080, and you can start seeing how much they are, and then you could actually start dividing them by one another as well. In other words, one answer with the other answer, and you can see just how many times or how much percentage a resolution is in terms of work for the GPU compared to another. Especially when you start updating this at 60 frames per second, it puts a hell of a lot more strain on things such as the GPU and even the CPU to start issuing draw commands, and a lot more strain on things such as memory bandwidth, because obviously, well, none of this stuff comes for free. Anyway, it's been a fairly short video for mine, but I just wanted to get this out there before I mosey on off to work. Obviously, later on today, I'm going to be continuing the Xbox One developer interview and doing a lot of analysis on that. And there's also going to be some other really cool stuff coming up as well. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.